I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered.
The gathering was supposed to repair what years of silence had damaged. Instead, one empty chair delivered a rejection more painful than any public statement. Inside Windsor Castle, King Charles waited for Princess Beatrice to enter the room, believing she had accepted his final invitation. But minutes before the doors were due to close, a private message reached the monarch. Beatrice was not coming, and her reason left him visibly shattered. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had arranged the evening carefully. He wanted only close family present, with no cameras, speeches, senior courtiers, or ceremonial distance. Windsor Castle, the royal residence used for public duty and family life, had been chosen because he believed its walls might offer safety. The gathering mattered because Andrew's damaged position had divided the York branch from the crown, while Beatrice's future place remained painfully uncertain. The message ended that hope in seconds. Princess Beatrice formally refused the invitation and stated that she would not attend a meeting that might force her to choose between loyalty to her father and obedience to the monarchy. She made the choice clear, and the clarity struck harder than anger. Charles read the words once. Then he read them again. Standing beside the prepared dining table, the king lowered himself into a chair and asked why she could not tell him face to face. His voice carried no command. It carried hurt. He had believed his niece still trusted him enough to enter the room, even if she rejected his plan. Camilla watched him from across the table and did not move. The queen consort, meaning the wife of the reigning king, understood that this was not merely a constitutional problem or scheduling dispute. She saw a man rejected by someone he loved. Yet she hesitated, because comfort might have made the wound feel even more real. Beatrice's final sentence deepened the damage. She declared that she would no longer join private gatherings where decisions about her family had already been made before she entered. Charles understood the hidden accusation. Someone had warned her about the true purpose of the meeting, and only a few people inside Windsor knew what he intended to discuss. The king ordered the doors to remain open for another 15 minutes. Then William received the news. The prince listened in silence, before asking the question that changed the entire evening. Who had warned Beatrice before she arrived? The empty chair had wounded Charles, but the message behind it threatened something larger, because Beatrice's refusal was rooted in loyalties the king had dangerously underestimated. To the public, the conflict appeared simple. A princess had declined a royal invitation. Inside the family, nothing about it was simple. Beatrice stood between three powerful forces: her devotion to Prince Andrew, her complicated affection for King Charles, and her responsibility to protect her own young family. Every choice carried a cost. Attending Windsor could betray her father. Staying away could break the heart of the king. Beatrice had spent years walking that narrow line. She supported Andrew in private, yet she avoided any public action that might deepen the damage surrounding him. Her father remained family, but the monarchy, the institution built around the sovereign and the duties of the crown, could not ignore the controversies attached to his name. That tension had shaped almost every choice she made. The invitation remained beside her tea, as Princess Beatrice sat in silence. She had opened the envelope, but she could not bring herself to read the final page again. Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi watched her hands tremble and asked what she feared most. Her husband expected anger. Instead, she admitted that attending would feel like silently accepting her father's exclusion. Edoardo did not rush to answer. He knew Beatrice still cared deeply for Charles, and he understood why that made the decision harder. The king had treated his niece with warmth, even while separating Andrew from royal life. That history mattered, because her refusal was not aimed at a distant monarch. It was directed at an uncle who believed their personal bond had survived the family's worst years. Charles struggled with that truth at Windsor. He told Camilla that he had never asked Beatrice to abandon Andrew. The king insisted he wanted honesty, not surrender. Yet Queen Camilla answered gently that the young royal might no longer see a difference. The queen consort, the title used for the reigning king's wife, warned that every palace decision now carried the same hidden message: choose the crown or stand with your father. William's presence made the gathering even more dangerous. Beatrice suspected the prince intended to discuss a permanent restructuring of family roles once Charles reduced his workload. That meant deciding who would represent the monarchy, who would remain close to its center, and who would be pushed farther away. The fear deepened when Beatrice learned that Andrew's remaining access to certain private Windsor spaces might also be reviewed. A supposedly personal dinner was no longer just about reconciliation. It could reshape her father's place inside the family forever. Charles walked back to her empty chair and placed one hand on it. He ordered a servant not to remove it. Somewhere inside him, the king still hoped she might arrive. But the refusal had begun long before that night. Its roots reached back to one private ceremony, one painful exchange, and the moment Beatrice first realized that Charles's compassion had limits, and Andrew might soon pay the price. Months before the Windsor refusal, the family gathered for what should have been a quiet ceremony honoring years of royal service. No confrontation had been planned. No public announcement was expected. Yet behind a closed door, Beatrice overheard a conversation that transformed her understanding of the king's intentions. One sentence convinced her that Prince Andrew's future had already been decided, and that she herself was being invited to help the crown move forward without him. Beatrice entered St. George's Chapel expecting restraint, not rejection. The Thanksgiving ceremony, a private service held to express gratitude and mark years of duty, brought senior relatives together under one roof. Andrew was allowed to attend the religious portion, but when the family moved into a smaller reception afterward, he was quietly left behind. His daughter noticed immediately, and the discomfort stayed with her. Charles believed the separation was necessary. The king wanted to preserve a clear line between private forgiveness and public restoration, meaning a return to official royal duties and status. William agreed. The prince understood that any sign of Andrew moving closer to the center could reopen old wounds and damage the monarchy's fragile trust. Beatrice heard the sentence before either man realized she was nearby. Charles told William that Andrew must never again be allowed to confuse family forgiveness with institutional restoration. The words were calm. Their impact was not. In that moment, she understood that her father's future had already been fixed, and no private appeal would change it. Beatrice confronted the king near the chapel corridor. She asked whether Andrew's exclusion was temporary, or whether the family had decided he would remain outside forever. Charles paused before answering. He told his niece that some doors could not be reopened simply because everyone wished the past had been different. The answer cut deeper than he intended. Beatrice felt that the monarch had separated her father from the family itself, not merely from public duty. Charles believed he had spoken an unavoidable truth. She heard a final verdict. Later that evening, Beatrice learned through a documented palace planning account that her name had appeared in discussions about younger royals supporting selected engagements without Andrew's involvement. The discovery changed everything. She began to suspect that the palace saw her as a bridge, a loyal daughter who could be drawn closer to the crown, while her father was moved farther away. Before leaving Windsor, Beatrice removed a commemorative pin from her coat and placed it inside her handbag. Eduardo watched her expression harden as she promised she would never again enter a family decision without knowing its true purpose. Months later, the new invitation arrived, using the same careful language. Beatrice recognized it immediately. Another decisive conversation was waiting behind Windsor's closed doors. This time, she would not enter unprepared. And when Charles attempted to reach her directly, years of controlled emotion erupted into their most painful confrontation yet. Charles did not accept the refusal in silence. Minutes after receiving Beatrice's message, he dismissed the aides around him and called her personally. What followed was not a formal exchange between a sovereign and a princess. It was a wounded uncle confronting a determined niece. Every careful phrase collapsed. Old affection turned into accusation, and the conversation exposed the fear neither had admitted that loyalty to Andrew had become incompatible with loyalty to the crown. Charles stood alone in a private sitting room at Windsor and ordered everyone to leave. Even the equerry, a royal officer who assists the monarch with official and personal duties, was dismissed. The king wanted no secretary, advisor, or family intermediary listening. This mattered because the conversation was no longer about protocol. It was about trust, and both of them believed the other had already broken it. Beatrice watched the phone ring before answering. Eduardo saw the hesitation in her face and quietly left the room, though he remained close enough to hear the strain in her voice. His wife knew the call could change her relationship with Charles forever. The monarch knew the same. Charles asked whether she truly believed he had invited her only to condemn Andrew. Beatrice answered without hesitation. Every recent family conversation, she said, had ended with her father losing another room, another privilege, or another piece of dignity. The king insisted that protecting the crown was not an act of cruelty. She replied that protecting the institution had become the excuse for every wound the family refused to face. The words hit hard. Charles asked her to come to Windsor immediately so they could speak in person, without aids and without conditions. Beatrice refused. She would not enter the castle while Andrew's future was being discussed in his absence. Beatrice then revealed what she already knew. The gathering included a proposal for her and Princess Eugenie to take on limited public duties, while remaining visibly separate from their father. Public duties meant official appearances performed on behalf of the monarchy, and the plan would have drawn the sisters closer to royal service, while pushing Andrew farther away. Charles fell silent. That proposal had never appeared in the invitation. Only a small circle knew it existed. Someone close to him had leaked the real purpose of the evening. The king finally asked the question he had been avoiding. Was she choosing Andrew over him? Beatrice's answer came quietly, but it carried years of pain. Charles had made the choice first, she said, when he allowed her father to be discussed as a problem instead of addressed as a brother. The call ended. William entered moments later and found the king staring at the dark telephone screen. Charles told the prince that the gathering would continue, but its purpose had changed. Beatrice had rejected the meeting, yet the machinery behind it kept moving. The real struggle was now clear. Who had the power to decide the family's future? Behind the emotional confrontation stood a harder reality. Charles was king, but he was not acting alone. William was thinking about the monarchy he would inherit. Camilla was protecting a husband whose strength had limits. Senior advisors wanted certainty, discipline, and distance from scandal. Beatrice's refusal disrupted all of them, because it proved that family loyalty could not be reorganized like a royal timetable, and that the next generation would not quietly accept every command. William believed the gathering had become necessary. The prince knew the future reign, the period when he would eventually carry the duties of sovereign, could not begin under the shadow of unresolved family conflict. Clear boundaries had to be drawn before Charles's workload reduced further. To him, uncertainty was not kindness. It was a danger waiting to grow. Camilla saw another side. She understood why the king wanted reconciliation with Beatrice, but she also saw what every discussion about Andrew was doing to him. The queen consort watched Charles carry private guilt behind public discipline. Each attempt to solve the crisis left him more exhausted, and she feared that one more family rupture might push him beyond what he could emotionally bear. William spoke first. He argued that Beatrice could not be offered a more visible royal role while openly resisting decisions made to protect the institution. Charles rejected that logic. The king warned that punishing his niece would prove her darkest belief that the family demanded obedience before affection. Camilla turned toward the prince, and told him his position might be institutionally sound, but emotionally brutal. William did not retreat. He answered that avoiding difficult choices had allowed earlier royal crises to become larger, uglier, and harder to control. The future king believed delay had already cost the monarchy too much. Charles removed his reading glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. His voice dropped. He admitted that he had invited Beatrice because he wanted one family conversation that did not end with someone walking away. The confession silenced William. It also broke Camilla's restraint, because she finally understood how personal the evening had always been. A senior private secretary then confirmed the worst. The leaked proposal could only have come from someone present at an earlier strategy meeting involving William, Camilla, and 2 trusted courtiers. The private secretary, the senior official who manages the monarch's most sensitive work, offered to begin an immediate inquiry. Charles refused. The king would not turn his family into suspects while claiming to seek reconciliation. Instead, he ordered Beatrice's empty chair to remain and removed the proposal about her future duties from the agenda. That decision protected her for the moment. It also angered those demanding certainty. Before the gathering ended, another choice was made. By morning, Beatrice would learn that refusing Windsor had carried a price Charles never approved. By sunrise, the private rejection had produced public consequences inside the royal household. A scheduled engagement involving Beatrice was quietly postponed. Her access to future planning meetings was placed under review. No announcement was made, yet the message was unmistakable. Absence had been interpreted as defiance. When Beatrice learned what had happened, she did not cry. She became still, and that silence frightened the people closest to her more than anger would have. Beatrice received the notification during breakfast. Her appearance at an upcoming youth entrepreneurship reception had been postponed, while officials reviewed her future involvement. The reception, a formal royal event supporting young business founders, mattered because it was one of the few duties connecting her directly to public service. Losing it meant more than a scheduling change. It threatened the careful role she had built outside her father's shadow. Beatrice placed her phone face down and looked at Eduardo. Her husband waited for anger, but none came. She told him the palace had finally answered the question Charles claimed he had never asked. Loyalty had been tested, and she had been punished for choosing Andrew. Charles learned of the decision soon afterward and reacted with fury. The king had removed the proposal concerning his niece from the gathering, yet someone had moved ahead without his approval. To him, the postponement was not discipline. It was a public warning delivered through private machinery. William admitted that his office had supported the delay. The prince argued that allowing Beatrice to continue unchanged would create confusion about whether she still accepted the boundaries protecting the monarchy. Charles rejected that reasoning. Discipline imposed at the wrong moment, he said, becomes humiliation. The future king heard the anger clearly, but he did not withdraw his concern. Eugenie then called her sister with news of her own. She had received a separate message, asking whether she would still attend future private family discussions without Beatrice. The request sounded polite, but its meaning was sharp. One sister could remain close to the crown while the other stood isolated. The sisters understood the danger immediately. The York family was being tested to see whether it could be divided. Beatrice feared that silence would allow the palace to present Eugenie's cooperation as acceptance. Her sister refused to let that happen. Eugenie rejected the invitation during the same phone call. She told Beatrice that she would not attend without her, and she would not allow silence to be mistaken for consent. The decision united them and forced Charles to confront the damage now spreading through the family. For the first time, the king understood that another official invitation would fail. To reach Beatrice, he would have to approach her not as sovereign, but simply as family. There were no aides in the room, no red boxes, no prepared statements, and no royal table separating them. Charles requested a private meeting with Beatrice, away from the formal apartments of Windsor. He arrived carrying nothing and asked for nothing except the chance to speak. For the first time, the king abandoned the language of duty. What emerged was a confession from an uncle who feared he had protected the monarchy while losing the people inside it. Charles chose a modest drawing room on the Windsor estate rather than the ceremonial heart of the castle. A drawing room is a private sitting room used for conversation rather than formal business, and that distinction mattered. He wanted Beatrice to understand that this was not another royal summons. It was a personal appeal. Beatrice agreed only after receiving clear assurance that no advisors, private secretaries, William, Camilla, or security officials would take part. She had learned to distrust meetings whose true purpose appeared only after the doors closed. This time, she demanded honesty before entering. Charles rose the moment she arrived. The king did not extend his hand or begin with a defense. He simply told his niece that he was sorry the invitation had made her feel trapped. Beatrice heard the apology, but she did not soften immediately. Too much had happened for one sentence to erase everything. Beatrice admitted that she had spent years fearing every act of loyalty toward Andrew would be treated as disloyalty toward Charles. She could support her father privately and still respect the monarchy. Yet, every new decision seemed to force those loyalties apart. The fear had followed her into every family room. Charles did not deny the pain. He confessed that Andrew's actions had created responsibilities the crown could not ignore. The crown, meaning the authority and public duties of the monarchy, had to protect trust beyond the family. But the king also accepted that Beatrice should never have been used as a pathway around her father. The monarch then confirmed that the proposed duties plan would be withdrawn. Neither Beatrice nor Eugenie would be required to distance herself publicly from Andrew as a condition of remaining accepted within the family. Beatrice answered carefully. She was not demanding her father's royal restoration or a return to official duties. She was asking Charles to stop treating love for Andrew as a moral failure. Charles moved his chair beside her instead of sitting opposite. Silence followed. Then Beatrice allowed him to hold her hand, though she did not apologize for refusing the gathering. The personal wound had begun to close. But outside Windsor, the refusal had already escaped into public view. The king and his niece had finally spoken honestly, yet the empty chair was becoming a symbol far larger than either intended. By the following morning, a private family refusal had become the defining royal image of the day. Commentators debated whether Beatrice had shown courage or disobedience. Crowds gathered outside Windsor. Broadcasters replayed every recent appearance involving the York sisters. Yet one newspaper front page captured the public mood more powerfully than any speech. A single vacant chair beneath the words, "The princess who said no." Palace officials refused to discuss the gathering, but their silence only sharpened the story. The palace, meaning the household and officials who manage royal duties and communication, offered no explanation for Beatrice's postponed engagement. That absence of detail mattered, because it allowed the public to connect the cancellation directly to her refusal. A private family wound now looked like an official punishment. The media divided almost immediately. Some commentators described Charles as a wounded peacemaker who had tried to bring the family together. Others saw Beatrice as a daughter refusing to let the monarchy control her private loyalties. The debate became more than gossip. It raised a harder question about whether royal service demanded emotional surrender. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered near the Long Walk. One woman stepped toward the gates, placed a white rose beside them, and left a handwritten card carrying 6 painful words. Family should not require surrender. The gesture spread across broadcasts within minutes. It gave the public dispute a human heart. A national broadcaster intensified the pressure that evening. Its report opened with Windsor's closed doors and described the conflict as a test of whether the modern monarchy can separate accountability from emotional exile. The phrase struck deeply, because Andrew's removal from public duty was one issue. The treatment of his daughters was another. Charles watched the coverage in silence. The king told Camilla that Beatrice's pain had become public entertainment, and he regretted that the family's private failure had been turned into a national spectacle. The queen consort heard the guilt beneath his words and reminded him that he could still stop the punishment from defining the outcome. Beatrice felt exposed, but she rejected advice to issue a defensive statement. She believed that arguing publicly would cheapen the honest understanding she had finally reached with her uncle. Her silence was not weakness, it was restraint. The palace then released a formal confirmation that Beatrice remained a valued member of the family, and that no change to her standing was being considered. Hours later, her postponed engagement was restored. Charles had overruled the attempt to punish her. The public storm began to settle. Yet one question remained. What had her refusal permanently changed inside the monarchy? The crisis ended not with a ceremonial announcement, but with a new understanding. Blood could not erase duty, yet duty would no longer be permitted to erase love. Beatrice never took her place at the original gathering. The chair remained empty. The dinner proceeded without her, and Charles carried the pain of that rejection long after the doors closed. Yet her refusal did not destroy their relationship. It forced both of them to confront a truth the monarchy had avoided for generations. Family loyalty cannot be commanded, inherited, scheduled, or measured by attendance. Sometimes refusing the room is the only way to be heard inside it. Charles finally accepted that the decision had never been a personal attack. The king understood that Beatrice had drawn a boundary against entering discussions about Andrew without honesty or meaningful choice. That distinction mattered, because family meetings were meant to offer trust, while institutional negotiations, formal talks about royal roles, duties, and restrictions were designed to reach decisions. Blending the two had made affection feel like pressure. Beatrice also accepted a painful truth. Her uncle carried a responsibility to protect the monarchy, and that duty would continue to place limits on her father. Andrew would not return to his former royal position simply because the family wished to heal. She could oppose the way certain decisions were handled without denying why boundaries existed. Their reconciliation did not erase the conflict. It did not restore Andrew, excuse old mistakes, or pretend every wound had closed. Charles and his niece created something more honest, respect without forced agreement. Several days later, Beatrice returned to Windsor through a private entrance. She met Charles alone and joined him for tea at the same table where her place had once remained empty. The king did not mention the refusal immediately. She did not offer an apology. Neither needed to repeat the argument they had already survived. Beatrice eventually told her uncle that she would attend future family meetings when their true purpose was stated clearly. She would listen, disagree, and remain present, but she would never allow her love for Andrew to become a bargaining tool. Charles accepted those terms. The monarch then ordered future discussions involving younger relatives to separate personal invitations from official negotiations. No difficult institutional decision would again be hidden inside the language of an informal family gathering. The empty chair changed meaning after that. It no longer represented abandonment. It became proof that Beatrice had risked royal approval to protect her emotional integrity. Charles had been shattered because her refusal showed how close he had come to losing her. He recovered by choosing honesty over authority. Beatrice did not defeat the king, and he did not force her surrender. The crown kept its boundaries. She kept her loyalty. Their bond survived because neither demanded a false victory. At Windsor, the most powerful statement was not delivered from a throne, it was made by an empty chair. And it taught a king that reconciliation begins only when love is no longer treated as obedience. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.